Good evening, everybody. Thank you. Hello, I'm Karen Dare from Communify, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet tonight and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Also like to recognise the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre. Politics in the Pub is an initiative of the Neighbourhood Centre. They hold 4 a year. And each event attempts to address the contemporary and important issues of the community of Brisbane. Our panellists and MCs are volunteers and receive no reward for their participation. So thank you in advance for your time. We'd like to thank the patrons of New Farm, whose financial support goes towards our community's most vulnerable and who also sponsor these events. We've probably got a couple of patrons here tonight, and we do have brochures, so if you're interested in joining the patrons, I know they'd love to have you. We're grateful for the generous support of the Powerhouse and for the committee of volunteers who make it happen. While we receive an amazing support for this event, we still have unavoidable costs, and you're very welcome on the front desk as you entered. There's merchandise, and if you'd like to purchase something or make a contribution, that would be fantastic. It would help us to keep this going. I'd like to introduce you to our MC, Matthew Burke. Matthew is a full-time Principal Research Fellow in the city's Research Institute at Griffith University. He is the Griffith University Chair for the Transport Academic Partnership, which coordinates the delivery of a work program for the Queensland transport agencies. This collaboration is funded by the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads and the Motor Accident Insurance Commission and involves Griffith, UQ and QUT. His main research activities involve an Australian Research Council linkage project on value capture funding and financing of public, here we go, over the page, transport. And he has an extensive portfolio of studies with his PhD and postdoctoral students on transport and equity, public transport, cycling and walking. Matthew is very proud that his team has helped Griffith University be ranked in the top 100 universities in the world, well done, in the field of transportation, science and technology in the latest Shanghai rankings. Please welcome Matthew and thank him in advance for moderating tonight.
No problem. Thank you. Good, the IT is working. Hello to the people up on the side. Great to see you. I'm going to get through a shopping list of a few notices before we begin. So before I introduce our panellists, can I just say tonight that if you're using social media, that's great, but turn your mobile phone to silent first, would be awesome. And then please use the hashtag PIPNewFarm, P-I-P New Farm. That would be great. There is a merch table for the older people in the audience, merchandise table, over in the back corner over here afterwards. So we'd encourage you to look for Communify merch after the event. This event will be live streamed, so if you do come up to the microphones later, be aware that means you're kind of giving your consent for your voice to be recorded. Just be aware of that. It will be available to watch back on the Communify Facebook page after the event. A podcast of the evening will be available in about a week or so on the Communify website. There are some key things happening. The Transport and Public Works Committee is currently conducting an inquiry into transport technology. Submissions close on the 28th of September, so feel free to head to their website if you would like to put in a submission. And now I'd like to tell you about tonight. So first of all, we're going to spend about 40 minutes here. For those who aren't familiar with this format, we're going to spend about 40 minutes here in a structured panel discussion first. Before then, there will be a microphone here and a microphone here for questions from the audience. Please don't try and grab me with your hand like this, hey, can I ask the question? Please come and orderly line up and get yourself up to one of the microphones afterwards. That would be great. Some rules for tonight, if I can. So first of all, respect, respect, respect. Let's please be gracious here. I unfortunately have been egged while being a cyclist on Brisbane's roads and subject to some vile comments myself in times. So let's just... Wit and good humour is also strongly encouraged. Please, no long questions when you come up here, short questions, and please only a question to one member of the panel. And of course, no statements. Let's please get to the questions when you come up. But you're all adults, I don't have to nag you too much about that, I'm sure. Let's get to who's who in the zoo. So, today, let me start on my right. Some of you probably already know Dr. Dorina Pojani, great recruit to academia here in Brisbane. She was recently promoted to senior lecturer at the University of Queensland. She teaches in their urban planning school, which is excellent, at least as good as the Griffith University Planning School. And I can say that because I have a PhD from her school. Dorina widely publishes with a lot of her work at the intersection of transport and land use planning. Her latest book is published by Springer and is entitled The Urban Transport Crisis in Emerging Economies. If you could welcome Dorina. And I'll continue on my right. So Andrew Demack is the Advocacy and Policy Manager at Bicycle Queensland, our state's leading bicycle advocacy organisation. Andrew and his colleagues are on a mission to get more people cycling more often. Andrew also runs the Bris Treadley website about cycling in the city, and he runs a bicycle tourism venture called Bike Overnights, which, if you ever wanted to get into the world of bike packing and cycle touring, and I'm sure he would like to tell you about cyclocross as well, excellent beginning point. So if we could welcome Andrew to the stage. Okay, I'm going to turn to my left and Professor Michael Milford, who is... Oh, sorry? Yes, waving. I thought you were saying no. Oh. So Michael is an Australian Research Council Future Fellow. For those who don't know what that is, that means our nation's scientific community has basically put a giant gold star above his head. They've elevated him to a very elite group. They are almost impossible to win. He's a professor in electrical engineering at QUT with a particular focus on artificial intelligence and image processing. A lot of Michael's research looks at robot navigation, one of the critical tools we need to develop for a future of autonomous cars and for driverless delivery bots and all that other sort of wonderful tech. Is that a reasonable way of... Yeah, okay. So if you could welcome Michael. Matthew, there are two Matthews up here. Sorry to cause confusion. So two Matthew Bs, it's even worse. So Matthew Bereni is the State Technical Leader for the Australian Road Research Board, running the Queensland office for one of our nation's most established and preeminent transport research organisations. He previously worked with the National Transport Commission. We'll get to them in a second. Matthew has a background in issues of pricing and transport economics, and is regularly advising our state and our nation's key decision makers on important issues, and he's now fronting up what is called the Future Transport Infrastructure Group within ARB. So if you would like to welcome Matthew to the stage. And last but not least, Geoff, least. So Dr. Geoff Allan is from the National Transport Commission, up here from Melbourne, come a long way, thank you. Good to see you're basically wearing black. You're in uniform. That's good. Melbourne uniform. He is the Chief Operating Officer at the NTC, managing their main work program. I won't ask what your boss does. Sorry. He brings to tonight's event over a decade's involvement in transport and infrastructure roles in both Canberra and Brisbane. He has a background in town planning. Isn't that good? From UQ. From UQ. Oh, wonderful. A PhD in public administration and significant expertise in issues of transport policy, as well as some of these issues at the integration of transport land use planning. So I'd just like to welcome Geoff. Great. Right. Now we have one apology today. Great. There's a couple of things I should say about this panel. I was personally contacted by 2 people asking about why there was no gender representation. Dorina is clearly female, but the organisers were female, and I was not the first choice as MC. I'd just like to say that. The Honourable Keith Pitt MP was a late apology for this panel. They've had a bit of a week in that side of politics in Canberra, and he probably needs a cup of tea and a good lie down. Our thoughts are with Keith after a pretty momentous week, so it's quite understandable. At late notice, the organisers did try to seek representation from state government, but it was very late notice, and so it's quite understandable. And so we regret that the voice of government is not on the panel tonight. Apologies. But not much could be done. All right, let's start with a question of transport politics, and then I can shut up and you can hear my voice a bit less. Every community has its own brand of transport politics. The things a community holds sacrosanct, its values, the debates it fights over. And that politics can be very, very different as you go around the world. So Dorina, you've travelled a long way from Europe. You've lived in quite a few different countries. You've recently been spending time in Vienna, Austria, a city that seems to get a lot of things right when it comes to transport. 6% mode share for cycling. About 8 times what we've got here in Brisbane. But anyway, Dorina, how do you've been here now quite a while, how do you view our local transport politics, the level of our transport debates, and how do we compare?
Well, I think that as a nation, so Brisbane as a city, but then also Australia as a nation, has seen a lot of talk recently about promoting transport sustainability, but I'll say that we have not been willing to put the money where the mouth is. Recently, we crunched the numbers with some colleagues at UQ, and we saw that funding for cycling infrastructure is abysmal. In fact, just putting together the funding, finding the numbers was very difficult to come by. Often, the numbers were lumped together either with sidewalks or sometimes with road improvements. So even that in itself shows a lack of consideration for cycling policy. And I'll say also at the city level, I'm a West End resident myself. So
the People's Republic of West End.
Yes, the People's Republic of West End. But I see also there this these mixed feelings about cycling policy. So on one hand, there are more people wanting to cycle more, but then I also have seen a lot of reluctance to give up, say, for example, one parking lane to create one cycling lane. So there is a little bit of a dual standing there. So that's where we're at. I think that reflects both national policy and local policy. And then from the side of academia, I'll also say that we've also been reluctant to fund cycling research. There isn't much funding for cycling or for active transport in general in Australia from what I've seen the short time I've been here.
Okay. Panel members, do you have any reflections on that? Do you, in accordance? Yeah?
I'd certainly echo Dorina's sentiments that cycling funding is abysmal. Often we see governments, state governments anyway, and local councils trying to set targets for different sort of modes, and that you'll often see that they want to have 10% of trips being made by walking and somewhere between 5 and 8% of trips being made by cycling. And what we don't see though is transport budgets reflecting that split. And so obviously if we want to get walking and cycling to those sort of mode shares, we will need to invest at least those percentages. And I would argue we'd need to invest more than those percentages to get to that percentage of mode share. And so we've looked at both local council and also state government funding of active transport initiatives, and it doesn't reach anywhere near those sort of numbers. And entirely absent from the funding situation is the federal government. I'm so disappointed that our Federal Assistant Minister for Transport isn't here.
Yeah.
Maybe could I add a little bit more to the funding situation? So some research we did with a student a few years ago, illuminated the funding situation a bit more. So it's not that there is zero funding all the time. The problem is there isn't a long-term vision to support cycling. So this is what people in government, the situation they described to us, they said, well, sometimes we have a progressive government in power, so then they'll make some funding for cycling available, and then any project that was ever dreamed of needs to be sort of crammed into that short space while that government is in power. So everything needs to happen within 4 years. But the problem is planning doesn't work that way. 4 years is just too short to plan a whole network for a whole city. So then people try and plan and design and implement as many bike lanes as they can. They don't have time to coordinate the network. And then in a bad year, you get nothing.
And we've seen this, of course, in public transport as well, you know, so...
Could I have a slight counter view to that? And it's more probably... having the most grey hair on this panel can offer a bit of perspective. I mean, Brisbane, if people remember Brisbane in the 1980s, there weren't a lot of bike paths around. And from the late 1980s, there was a hell of a lot of money that governments, and it started, I think the Bicentennial Fund created the Coronation Drive bike path, and then when the Goss government got elected, you talk about personal interest, Wayne Goss was a cyclist, and he spent a lot of money, or his government spent a lot of money putting in bike paths certainly along the South East Freeway. When I lived in Brisbane, that's where I used to commute from. And I know recently the Queensland Minister Mark Bailey was proudly announcing some upgrades to that bike path. So governments have been doing stuff, and compared to 30 years ago when the Department of Main Roads built main roads, and we're quite proud about not accommodating bike lanes or having too much pedestrian room beside them, I think we've actually come a long way, and it's probably worth acknowledging that to some degree.
Sure. I'm intrigued by the panel's comments because to me, I mean, I live in suburban Salisbury and I watch popular media, you know, I still sometimes watch Channel 7 News and Channel 9 News, etc., and listen to talkback radio on occasion. And what we tend to get on those forums is a bit of a different picture. A very pro-car politics is out there. A rhetoric of congestion busting and the like. It's interesting that that's not, you know, there is a... Yeah, anyway. Okay.
Can I make a comment on that, Matthew?
Yeah.
I'm sure that everyone in the room received the same letter as I did, which was from the Lord Mayor about the priorities for Brisbane City Council. And you would have noticed that the survey that was conducted demonstrated that most people actually wanted more car park. That came first before bicycle lanes. So the fact is, you know, that's what people want. But at the same time, we know that when we build bicycle lanes, they get used. Mm-hmm. So is that a case of people not really knowing what they want?
I think that's a case of self-interest is what that's a case of. And I think one of the things that if we're looking for leadership from governments and local councils, the one idea I would like to get across in my working life at Bicycle Queensland is that the road reserve is for moving people from place to place and not for the storage of private property. And I think that the idea that we can store our private property on the road reserve forever and a day without cost to, you know, there is a cost to the community in that. And I think that what we have failed to get across is this very idea, is that the road reserve was put aside for the movement of people from place to place.
Now, of course, parking might not be an issue in the near future. So as a bit of a segue, our politics might change in the near future. The new tech is coming, and the new tech might change the way we travel, and it might change us, and it might change our politics. Systems are going through a set of revolutions. The most obvious change people are probably aware of is the move to what in the trade are called connected and autonomous vehicles, robot cars. The robo-taxi that might soon come down a street near you. So, Michael, where are we at now with this new technology? Is a driverless car for my own daily travel all that close? But most importantly, how might their arrival change our behaviours, change us and our politics?
Sure, so I've learnt to judge the audience, so I'll calibrate my response to the crowd. What I'll do is I'll paint two different scenarios. a positive utopian scenario, which you may be skeptical of, but I'll paint it anyway, and a horrible dystopian scenario. So in the positive scenario, autonomous car technology develops really quickly. It's deployed in a moderately responsible way in conjunction with government and the public and consultation. The number of cars that are owned by people drops to almost nothing. The total number of cars on the roads drops to a small fraction of what they are. Cars no longer discriminate against pedestrians or cyclists. They're even and they're held accountable when bad things, which will still happen on occasion. And people are able to get around in solar-powered, basically effectively what are solar-powered cars. That's the utopia. The dystopia is autonomous car technology advances and it exacerbates inequity issues. People still own cars, but now upper middle class families own 3 or 4 cars. When they go to the football, they send 3 or 4 cars to come pick them up, circling the block at 2-minute intervals, so I don't have to wait more than 2 minutes to get into my car. You pay for access, you pay a surcharge to get less traffic on your route to work, and all those sundry sort of bad ideas. Now, those are extremes, and neither of those extremes is likely to happen. I think government and the public sector is empowered enough to really influence this, but we have to act now because most of the activity is happening overseas, and we don't want to be reactive, we want to be proactive if we can.
Any comments at this stage, anyone? No? No?
I wanted to actually ask maybe a question about the ethics of self-driving cars. I keep hearing about these philosophical questions that technology itself cannot find an answer for. For example, who has priority in case of an accident kind of situation? At present, the driver makes a decision sort of spur of the moment, so then you can't blame the person exactly later. But with self-driving cars, you'll have to write an algorithm ahead of time, make those decisions ahead of time, so the car will sort of have to decide, do they want to protect the people inside the car, give those priority, or protect maybe pedestrians that are crossing the street, who gets to live and who gets to die.
So there are whole conferences run on that very important question. Just in brief, it's known as the trolley problem. It's how do you program in priorities. Speaking positively, let's take a positive view of it, and it could go wrong. There is a widely agreed upon, with regular consultation, regular updates, harm minimization system that is put into these cars. And everyone knows what it is. Whenever something bad happens, the car is held accountable. You have access to all of the data, which you don't have in current incidents. So people should be held responsible. You just don't have the data for it now. So that's maybe not quite fair to the computer-driven cars. It minimizes harm by some set of standards. It's not going to be perfect. And also, when it decides to do something, the fallacy with all these ethical arguments, it's why humans are very bad at dealing with these hypotheticals, is humans know there is always some uncertainty as to the outcome of their actions. They wrench the wheel sideways, but you know there's not a 100% chance that the outcome's going to happen, and it'll be the same for the cars. And the other, I guess, sort of horrifying but reassuring, I think, long-term view is if these systems become deployed, and if they're overall safer than humans, big ifs, and if they've been deployed for 10 years, you will have statistical data far better than any other system before in history with which to constructively and critically assess them, which you can't do with current human drivers. So there are positives to it as well.
Unless you're in car repairs, or road safety research. Glad I didn't choose that as an industry to get into. But Geoff, I want to swing across here. So this ethical dilemma is just one of the many, many issues that government needs to deal with to get ready for this coming revolution. And to get there, we're going to need the states and the Commonwealth to actually work collaboratively in a coordinated fashion so that these vehicles can be legally, safely used. So what does need to change and what needs to happen for all this to occur?
So there's actually a lot of things that do need to change. And I think the key one, and Michael spoke earlier about holding the computer accountable. So one thing that ministers, the Commonwealth governments and state and territory transport ministers have agreed in principle to create a new legal entity called an automated driving system entity. So that is basically the entity that will be responsible for the system in a car. Currently there are, I know this is a little bit technical, but there are three main parties who are regulated by driving laws. So the manufacturer, or OEM, original equipment manufacturers, the registered owner and the driver. And they each have different responsibilities. But this new entity, the ADSE, will take responsibilities that are currently owned by each of those parties. So we're working with state and territory governments to craft appropriate laws that places appropriate responsibility on that entity, but realising over any journey that the responsibility for control of the car may be shared, may alternate, etc. But to go back to one of the earlier points, governments have all agreed that safety is a key priority, and they want to make sure that it is safe before an entity or the computer can take over control of the car. But the other safeguards that ministers have agreed to as well, which we're trying to turn into law, is to make sure that entity has a presence in Australia, there's adequate financial capital for the entity, so in case things go wrong, but also to make sure the data is available to governments in the case of an accident, and that has to be made available, ministers have agreed, within a reasonable short period, within 24 or 48 hours. So governments have already looked at, we on behalf of governments have looked at the safeguards to put in place, and we're, as I say, still a long way from getting anything finalised, but starting to put the planks together in that regard.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what might this future mean for our cities, you know, for land use planning and the like? If we don't have to park our cars at home, do our houses change? Do our streets change? What happens to the drive-through at Macca's? You know, the whole landscape of our cities may change, and that may lead to significant changes in the look and feel, not just of our homes. You know, the double car garage integrated into the house probably goes. The setback of a house space in front of the house probably goes. The streets can be narrower. Neighbourhoods can be built in different ways. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. There's other tech that's coming. So microelectrics, the scooters are on their way. There are other changes. Is there anything other panellists want to?
One of the companies that is doing a scooter hire in the States at the moment came to see us at Bicycle Queensland recently because they're interested in doing electric bikes and scooters and normal pedal bikes in Australia. And certainly they're running up against some bureaucracy in terms of the scooters, but I think these scooters have been very successful in the States.
They are taking over in the US. They are taking over. Imagine a kick scooter like the kids' toys, but with an electric motor, like the Razor scooters, in a shared, dockless, public hire scheme with people collecting them every evening. There's going to be 5,000 to 10,000 of these things on the streets of Brisbane by the end of the year, I'd imagine.
Not until they solve the regulatory problem around them, because they're not a legal vehicle.
Well, in Melbourne, they tried them, and it looks like all bikes had to leave. They tried the dockless bikes, not the scooters just yet, but the dockless bikes. And it looks like the reactions were vastly different to the idea of dockless bike sharing. So on one hand, there were the technology enthusiasts that were saying, well, this is a new technology, we should give it a chance because that's the future. So we should try it out. Maybe this thing will be great for our cities. And then there were all the sustainability enthusiasts that would say, well, because this is a form of cycling, even though it's dockless and bike sharing, so not private cycling, but we should embrace it for that reason. It brings sustainability to our cities. But then there were all the detractors, all the criticizers on the other camp. So some of them were the anti-technology crowd, the Luddites, and they were saying, well, this is a new technology, we need to scrutinize it. Hold on a second, just because we have it, it doesn't mean we need to use it and embrace it without giving it any thought. And then finally there was the anti-capitalist crowd, and they were arguing that, well, here's a private company and they're using city streets for private gain and they're just littering the city and they're not bringing much benefit. We've just let them run loose and they're using public property. They're sort of encroaching on public space and they're sort of creeping in. So, yeah, all those tensions could not be solved in Melbourne's case, so O-Bike failed.
They're
Perhaps
gone.
unfortunately. Yeah, they're gone.
They're shut. They got run out by an environmental levy. The
Yes.
government
Yes.
brought in an environmental levy saying if you litter with one of these bikes, you will be
Yes.
fined, no matter which company you are.
Which made it
And they-
unfeasible
they-
for them
they
to
shut
operate.
down
But
overnight.
I'll say this, I've heard it also in their home country, Singapore, which is arguably a more orderly country than we are, which is sort of more organized. It seems like they're also running into problems of vandalism, so they've had to resort to geofencing, these invisible fences around the bikes. So maybe the world is not ready for dockless just yet.
You still have a chance to try on the Gold Coast, because the Gold Coast has a competing scheme called Mobike that's also dockless and is still currently running. So if you want to get down to the coast and chuck a bike into a canal, still have a chance.
Now, one of the other great shifts that's about to happen, one of the other great transport revolutions is the electrification of the vehicle fleet. So we won't just have robot cars. The great likelihood is that we will not be putting petrol into our cars very much. That's going to be great for the Barrier Reef, not having fuel tankers running through it like we currently do. But there are other consequences. So Australia has, for about 70 years, used a wonder tax called petroleum fuel excise. That tax helped build our national highway system and allowed us to invest in transport systems. But what happens if that goes away? How are we going to pay for transport in the future? So, Matthew, how are we going to pay for our highways and byways and our transport systems?
So, Matthew, this is actually a quite simple question. I'll make sure to make it sound very complicated. The way it works in Australia, there is a fixed charge and a variable charge for road use. So, in simple terms, most people in the room here are road users, and you pay your car rego, and that's one way of funding the maintenance and the building of our roads. And you also pay through the fuel. That's the road user charge. So to be actually quite specific about it, trucks above 4.5 tons contribute more by way of what is called the road user charge. So it's about 25 cents per liter of diesel that goes to road funding. So there you go. There is a fixed charge and there is a variable charge. Tomorrow, let's imagine that all trucks become electric. They won't pay this road user charge because they won't buy diesel anymore. So the question is, how do we deal with the fact that revenue is going to decrease? So there will still be some money that is going to come from your rego charge and your stamp duties, but there will be a pretty steep decrease in terms of fuel excise. To give you an idea, in 2013, so about 5 years ago, Australia collected about $28 billion of revenue for road maintenance and construction through fuel and rego and stamp duties, and about 11 billion of that was from fuel alone. So that's about 44% of the funding. About 20 years ago, this was 39%. So there is a trend here, which is we are collecting less money through fuel. So in terms of dealing with it, there are a few options, but one that is commonly mentioned by government is the use of new technologies, and in particular, that's what people refer to mass distance location charging. So
road pricing.
That's right, road pricing. So to give you an idea, you would have a box in your vehicle, and the government will track where you go, how far you travel, and when it comes to trucks, there would be also the technology required to monitor the mass of vehicles. So if a very heavy truck goes on the road, it is going to create more wear and tear, and therefore they will pay a price according to that. So that's one way to do it. In other countries, fuel excise is used as a good proxy for road use. But in reality, you have big corporations that can afford very fuel-efficient vehicles that are going to pay less than your owner-driver, your family dad that is driving his own truck. So there is an issue around equity here. How do we make sure that everyone pays the same price? So the underlying concept here is pay as you go. What people want is that the more you use a car, the more you use your car and you cause wear and tear, the more you have to pay. So that's the challenge that we are dealing with here.
Yeah, so I saw you giggle a bit there at the mention of the government tracking you and your vehicle.
I just thought it came out perhaps the wrong way.
I know what you mean.
I was going to say, I've seen that film.
It's actually something that is not totally foreign. There are companies, there are insurance companies that encourage people to install a box in their car to understand their usage of their vehicles to give you a discount on your insurance premium at the end of the year. So some people are very happy to do it.
Well, the entire Smart Cities agenda, Smart Cities are the city of data analytics and response. So, and that's a planning movement that's come into government. That whole movement is predicated on us opting in or not having a choice to opt in to being followed. Thank you, Google, as I discovered last week. Even though, you know, you might set your settings to opting out, they were still tracking us. Anyway, sorry. All right, so there's a whole heap of things here. So congestion pricing is something that's been talked about and talked about. Federal governments have been saying the states and local governments should look at it. That they like saying these things. But us introduce a new tax? Oh, we wouldn't do that. But you could. So the politics of this is interesting to me, that the federal government would kind of be liking to push others in directions, saying, you've got responsibility for this. We don't necessarily want to bring in the new tax. That's just my reading of it, Geoff. You might have a different view?
No, the Infrastructure Australia put out their report on Australia's infrastructure readiness about 2 years ago. The Commonwealth Government's response did just that, where it suggested looking at congestion charging. From recollection, the Commonwealth Government's response was it was something they would perhaps look at in about another 10 or so years, so a few years down the track. But when you look at roads, there are, and speakers have touched on it tonight, 3 components, and they're all priced differently. So Andrew spoke about the road reserve, which is basically the bit of land, and that's almost, in many instances, a gift from the developers or whatnot, but is often bought. And that almost has a cost of zero after it's bought, but a massive cost before it's bought for a road. Then you have the infrastructure part, which gets worn, as Matthew said, the heavier the vehicle, the more it wears the road. And then you've got the temporal element, the element of time, and that is the most difficult thing to actually cost, particularly when you have a look at roads. Roads are free for, generally fairly free-flowing for 21, 22 hours a day. And it's only those peak times where they may actually be some value in charging for congestion. So it is a very complex issue, and probably the technology may not be there at the moment to fully, cost it and charge for it.
Yeah. Well, in a car-owning democracy, moving in that direction to me looks pretty difficult. All right. Now, I really think...
Matt, could I ask some experts about this? Because one of the things, that it seems to me that one of the public debates, and as you say, on Talkback Radio and in these sort of forums and in the political sphere, congestion gets brought up as a big issue in Brisbane. I just don't understand.
We have a federal minister who's going to be responsible for congestion busting.
Well, and I well remember way back when Campbell Newman was trying to become elected as Lord Mayor, he had massive billboards saying on congested roads that are congested for an hour a day, saying he would bust congestion or whatever he was going to do. But the Brisbane Times did a whole series recently on congestion on Brisbane roads, and I looked closely at the data they'd collected, and it seemed almost negligible. The time difference between travelling from Chermside to the city in peak hour to out of peak hour was about 15 minutes. And I thought, where's the problem? So I'm a bit at a loss to understand what our congestion issue really is? What's it about? Do people really care about 15 minutes more?
Maybe just a comment on that, and I'm not for or against congestion charging here. I mean, we're quite lucky in Brisbane. I used to live in Melbourne where things were quite different. But there was a research conducted a few years ago in Sydney that showed that about 25% of road users in Sydney during the morning peak could actually have undertaken that trip at a different time. They didn't have to do it during morning peak. They could have just, gone shopping at 10:30 or whatever. So the beauty, in terms of economics, the beauty of congestion charging is that it actually provides a price signal. It's an incentive. So I'm not for or against it, but from an economic point of view, it works. It has worked in Stockholm, in London, in Singapore, and it is definitely worth looking at it.
And I think certainly in this city, congestion has been an issue going back, past prior to my birth. The Wilbur Smith study, if some people have heard of that, from the mid-1960s, looked at congestion, and as a result, the government of the day decided to build freeways. They started with the Southeast Freeway and it resulted in other ring roads. So it's been an issue for more than 50 years. And the fact that we still have tunnels and other toll roads being built, and I came in from the airport along the tunnel, there is a willingness to pay. So some people actually do put a value on that congestion and will pay to avoid it.
Perhaps it's also a question of looking at how many trips are actually short trips that could potentially be accommodated by cycling. If infrastructure was available, there would be a way to wean those short distance commuters from driving.
And when Matt was talking about electric vehicles coming, I think we should mention that short trips by electric bike or power-assisted bike.
Sure, micro-electrics,
Power-assisted bikes are becoming much cheaper and much more widely available and seem to me to be an ideal thing in a hilly city like Brisbane.
Yeah, but I still look at the data which says that we're now getting significant bike uptake and significant walking to work in the inner city and almost nothing in the outer suburbs. And I just want to drill into this if I can, Andrew. So are there two Brisbanes, really, when it comes to transport politics? Is there, and I'm going to go off reservation here, is there, a People's Republic of West End and the like, for lefto, greeno, commo, ratbag bastards who ride their bicycles into, buy a soy skinny latte at the cafe, and and some are a little bit further out. Those middle-aged men in lycra, mammals
in Salisbury.
In places like Salisbury. But as you kind of get to that line of about 10k out of the city, the data tells us that kind of travel drops off. So cycling to work really starts to plunge. We get down to less than 0.5% of mode share. Cycling to work, public transport declines significantly. It really is a very, very automobile-based landscape. And you can see it in the landscape. We built a landscape for the car. Funnily enough, everyone out there drives. So, but in the inner city, things are definitely changing, and there seems to be a new politics. Now, you work for a bike advocacy organisation. How strong is that new politics, and does it have the potential to change things?
Well, I want to just push back against the idea to start with that cycling is somehow radical lefty activity. I think cycling is low-cost transport for everybody, and I think if we looked at the history of cycling across Queensland, across Australia, that the working man or woman riding to work was a major force in the development of the regional cities of Queensland. If you certainly in the history of places like Maryborough, Bundaberg, Rockhampton, people riding their bikes to work to their factory jobs in the meatworks or at Walkers at Maryborough. And the
stereotype of the overweight, fast food eating, four-wheel driving, I hate to use the word, bogan of the outer suburbs is similarly unfair.
I think so. So I guess what I'm saying is that the bikes are good wherever it's good to ride a bike. And the thing that you're identifying is that we've built this ring around the city of places where you have to have two cars to survive. And I think that's a land use planning mistake that happened from the freeway building era of the 60s and continues to happen. And we're now building amazing subdivisions where bikes are welcome. So we've been in conversations quite often with places like Yarrabilba and Aura up at Caloundra. Aura, they're building amazing bike facilities. I hope lots of people ride their bikes around there because they're still going to drive their cars to get wherever they want to go outside of Aura. And certainly Yarrabilba, there's going to be great bike paths in Yarrabilba, but everybody's going to have 2 cars because they've got to drive to the Gold Coast or Brisbane where they work. So I think the question you're asking, I think, is more about land use than about how the bike is used.
It creates a particular politics.
Yep.
So, people on the outskirts and the fringe, this congestion-busting mantra, which is definitely targeted at marginal electorates, is that people seem to feel that the solutions to the problems of the car is more car. I need road widenings. I don't need the busway to be extended to the Logan Hyperdome.
Well, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's reasonable if you live there. Why would it not be reasonable? But the idea that cycling has power in the inner city, look, I think that's probably overstated. My friends in the audience I can see who are cycling lobbyists might disagree. I don't know, but I think that it's very dependent on the whim on the political leaders of the time and whether they're prepared to listen to the bike lobby. I don't think that there's a whole lot of
sport has, I think, in the inner city become a thing. I see a proposal in Melbourne coming into an amazing proposal this morning in Melbourne, if you haven't seen it, a $50 billion underground circular railway. Quite phenomenal. But clearly, I think, pitched at stealing Greens votes in the inner city. That to me scream, and in those middle suburbs, that we're even more pro-public transport than those guys. Labor's kind of sending that message, I think. And there is a politics there. I don't think that, so here the LNP has regularly accused Labor of Cross River Rail of being about Jackie Trad's inner city seat, which I think is crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. The main beneficiaries are actually on the Gold Coast, but anyway, which no one seems to understand. Yes.
Matt, can I also suggest there's a practical element here? So Brisbane, in simple terms, it's hot and it's hilly. So if you've got to come in, and I used to live at Mount Gravatt, you've got to come in over a couple of hills to get to the freeway bike path, and then you go along and it's fine. That's, it takes a lot longer. Whereas if you live by the river, you can go along the flat section, you come in, it's a far more gentle ride. So I think there's just a practical element that limits cycling.
Well, that, and also it's a question of land use in another sense. The way the suburbs are designed is one thing, but then there's also the fact that this is a very monocentric city in the sense that most jobs are concentrated in the CBD, so that's where most traffic is going towards. So it might be unrealistic to expect that people will be driving such long distances, 20k into the CBD. Those types of trips might have to be accommodated by public transport no matter what. But yes, certainly neighborhoods in outer suburbs could be designed better, so at least people could cycle in their local neighborhoods. The kids could go to the local school by bicycle. You could go to the local store by bicycle, but maybe not the commute to work.
Now, if you have a question, feel free to come up, but we'll just continue the conversation. But if you have a question, feel free to come up to one of the microphones.
I just have a slightly contrary perspective on a lot of what's been spoken tonight. So I'll just talk about solar power. So I think solar power is an interesting example because it was a hugely political issue, good for the environment, good for Australia, very politicised. And now it's pretty much quietly gone away because there are solar farms popping up everywhere, and people who don't give a hoot about the environment are investing because they think it's a good investment decision. They don't care about the environment, but they're investing. What are the concrete monetary, in terms of health, return on investment reasons, so you don't have to rely on a politician being an advocate for bikes? They just do it because they're greedy. That's another way to think about how you can actually get change, as opposed to just banging your head against the wall over and over and over again.
But almost every transport system is effectively socialism. Roads in this country are effectively a socialist product. right?
So take the health angle, and their companies already pay people to live close to work, not for any other reason that they know that overall that is good for their productivity for a number of reasons. Monetize the health benefits of people cycling and return it in an actual monetary form. That will incentivize people and government to do it. Hard, cold cash.
But I don't think, it's not as if people don't cycle now because they're not getting any money out of it. I think they don't cycle because bike lanes aren't there.
It's not irresistible because we've created a car-based system that makes driving irresistible.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So feel free. Remember the rules, please. Questions. Short questions. Questions to only one member of the panel, please. And we'll begin over on the right. Thank you very much, sir.
My name's Michael Speech.
Tech.
You'll have to turn it on.
Sorry. Here we go.
Oh, there we go. My name's Ari. I'm part of a group of rideshare drivers trying to set up a platform cooperative. So my question's for the politician whose government has the power to legislate a maximum commission taken by companies like Uber. So currently they take 27.5% of every fare, massive amounts of money leaving the country, leaving the pockets of workers who are on average unemployed for over a year before they get a job working as a rideshare driver, and who are making on average $14 or so an hour. And so how does the Labor Party stand not supporting workers in that area?
We don't actually have a politician on the stand, as I tried to explain at the start.
Apologies.
Yeah.
Well, comment.
Would anyone like to make a comment? No? Look, yeah, I don't think Uber, when they first arrived in Australia, were a very great operator. Have a look at what has been put into place in terms of the modest regulation. I think Uber played the game of becoming too politically popular to be prevented from being regularised in Australian cities. And I've got absolutely no sympathy for the conventional taxi companies who invented the model of the self-employed contractor who is liable to mass exploitation. I have some sympathy for a few mum and dad investors in taxi plates, but not for the people who own 400 of them and ran booking services in this city and who've seen their investments smashed by Uber. So it's a pretty grim industry at the best of times. And is it a bad thing that some of those operators in the food delivery side of things have just been quietly exited out of Australia? No. And I think we should see more action by our courts on that front. I'll just say that. Anyway, okay, sorry, I understand now that microphones will actually be brought to you. So attract the attention of the staff on either side. Apologies. Okay, so we're coming over this side.
Thanks. My name's Nelson. Earlier tonight there was a short discussion about road charging and pay-as-you-go charging. I think a comment made about the democratisation of roads. But the reality is that currently roads are cross-subsidised in their funding. So with the democratisation of roads, how do you deal with road funding and the political element that goes with that, and how the governments deal with it when there's going to be companies and individuals that say, well, you know what, this year I paid $10,000 in road charging. Where's my $10,000 in road upgrades? So how do you deal with, I suppose, the transparency of road funding and road charging?
Is that directed, Matthew, would you like to respond?
I feel this is for me, isn't it? Look, you raise a point that is actually quite common, and like everyone else, when you get your ATO form at the end of the year saying this is what you paid this year in tax, and you are provided a breakdown of where your money goes on a pie chart, you like it, like it's normal, everyone does like it. Like the issue that you're raising here is a common issue of what is called hypothecation. Hypothecation means that revenue is raised as a tax or a charge, and it is directly allocated to something. So in a perfect world, every single cent that is raised from the road goes back to the road. We don't have that in Australia. It doesn't work like that.
Potentially for good reason, Andrew? Anyway, sorry.
There is an approximate allocation, but I challenge anyone to actually, and Geoff, you can probably comment on that, but I don't think that there is a direct allocation. So it's probably, on par, but it might be some years a bit above, other years it might be under.
Geoff?
So if you look at funding of roads, it's been incredibly, how do I say, murky or not very clear, and this is going back decades. So you look at local government roads, for example, the Commonwealth Government up until 96 gave a local government grants component in the financial assistance grants. That got rolled in, it's taken to be spent on roads. There's revenue, and in this state the Queensland Government and successive governments have given a commitment that revenue from speed fines will be spent on roads as well as registration and other things. So it's very difficult to say exactly where the money's coming from. It's easy to say what's been spent, but where it's coming from is difficult. And sorry, just to move from Nelson's question back to the earlier question, fortunately I'm something different from a politician, possibly worse, and that's a bureaucrat. So.
Great. So many questions. Over this side, I mean, we haven't talked about the big transport mega projects of our time in this city. We haven't talked about why my bus won't go near a railway station. Yes, sir.
I also got the pamphlet this week from the council explaining all the budgeting, and I'll just give a solution first. My quick 10-minute thought. If you're very quick, don't worry. If we're spending $2 billion on transport, etc., just dig tunnels everywhere, make Brisbane flat with bike paths, and everyone will be happy. But my question is, I've been here in Brisbane now for about 2 years from New South Wales. I love Queensland, it's amazing. But the thing that has shocked me a lot, I will be very quick, don't worry, is the congestion. And it's not a huge city, but the traffic for a city of this size is terrible. My problem is it a traffic light thing that they're not synchronised? What would be the way to...
The TomTom index of congestion suggests we're not that bad at all. In fact, we're really very pleasantly very good on overall city congestion. So,
yeah.
the data analytics tell us we're not doing so bad.
But the practical thing of driving is terrible. Like, 2-second example, driving last Tuesday night to the airport from my house at Indooroopilly, 8 o'clock at night, not a busy time, shouldn't be a busy time, got every single traffic light to the CBD, and that is not an uncommon thing at all. Is that something that could be looked at to make it flow easier?
I didn't think there were any traffic lights if you took Legacy. Oh, is it the toll road problem that we're... yeah. So we've chosen to build infrastructure to solve that exact problem, but you need to pay a quite prohibitive sum to be on that monopoly toll road operator.
And it's my choice not to use that.
Well, it's your choice to sit in the traffic light.
Yes. So, but what I'm getting at here is this was a political decision that we voted for. We voted in this city for Trans Apex.
Yep.
It was a pro-roads revolt in this city. So, it was a very politically popular electoral campaign run by a Lord Mayor here. We now live with the consequences of those actions. And sorry, I'm talking way too much.
Yeah,
to me, the problems with Trans Apex, this is a classic example. It was meant to free up traffic at the surface and put cars down underground where we wanted them to go, and yet we put the toll on the infrastructure underground where we wanted the cars to go, and we didn't put the toll at the surface where we wanted the cars to disappear. It was just... anyway, sorry.
Well, how about thinking in a different way? We could also decide as a society that we're just not going to deal with car congestion at all. We're just going to focus on improving buses and bicycle lanes, and that congestion that way will take care of itself. That's another way to do it. Controversial, but it's possible. I mean, there are cities that have embraced that approach.
Okay. Next question.
Good evening. Just one point. There's actually the majority of employment is outside the city centre. There's only about 20% of employment within the city centre. and that goes to my actual question, is we have, I think on my last count, 8 bridges to connect the city centre with one side and the other, and then we go a couple of kilometres at least in either direction to get any sort of river crossing. It is absolutely ludicrous in this city that we're not doing more city crossings, and that would in fact halve, at least I would say, half of the congestion in the city. Could somebody please comment on that? Because I think it's so obvious.
Look, just to comment on that, I moved to Brisbane about 4 years ago, and I used to live near Hawthorne, and my job was at the gasworks in New Farm, and I didn't quite understand why there was no bridge between Hawthorne and the gasworks. So I did some research, like you would do on Google, and I found out that there was talking about community, like tonight. That's topical. There was some sort of consultation that took place a few years ago, and the residents of Hawthorne said they didn't want a bridge. So we're talking about giving back, power back to the people. That is a case of democratic choice, I guess.
And just to add a historic note, the Gateway motorway, I think that was the last major river crossing in Brisbane, apart from the Clem 7 tunnel, certainly the one above the surface. Russ Hinds gave us that after he visited Hong Kong in the late 1970s, 1979. And again, people who remember who Russ Hinds was, a very infamous Queensland Minister for Main Roads. And he thought, wow, this is great. I can get across from one side of the harbour to the other without... He originally wanted a tunnel, but realised it was not cost effective and then went for a bridge.
There have been bridges built since, of course. The Eleanor Schnell and the Kurilpa Bridge and the Go-Between Bridge are all since the Gateway motorway. But yeah, I agree, more bridges. It's crazy that bridges are expensive infrastructure, and the business case process that governments go through has to be.
But there is always a local political lens. True. And a politician who will wear it.
Yeah.
And parties are often wary of that.
Well, I was going to say the lack of bridges has, in some sense, benefited certain neighborhoods. For example, a place like the West End that's so low rise within walking distance of the CBD. That's what's allowed that kind of place to exist. Any other place, if there had been more bridges there historically, would have been totally high-rise development. Now that there are more bridges, in fact, we are seeing more high-rise development, and I don't see the local residents being very happy about it. So there is...
Which local residents? Yes. Sorry. So where are we next? Over here?
Hi, my name is Pedro. Matt Bereni commented on equity issues with charges, pay-per-use charges, and technology will definitely allow us to charge at marginal cost. Great from economic efficiency point of view. But I'd like to hear either from Dorina or Michael or Matt Burke. How does that would become an extremely regressive tax as poorer people tend to live farther and travel longer? And it's definitely the case for Brisbane. What is the policy? How do you see that happening? What is the policy that needs to be in place? Thank you.
You thought about this?
No, I know it's regressive, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, okay. So there's a number of models that are being put out there for future possible road pricing scenarios when the government tracks every vehicle and our movements. One of the ones I'm quite interested in is a zone-based system that people are saying if you just do a local trip, you don't pay at all to use your local roads. The minute you cross a boundary to go somewhere else, you start to pay. But that the main motion for welfare that I'm seeing people are suggesting is that we need to build that in some way of rebate, Pedro. So that is, we give pensioners a discount on their travel later. So we charge them, but then we give them a discount. And it might be we have to say, look, you are a low-income earner in an outer suburban environment. We will subsidise you via some external mechanism. But it may not be through the direct pricing point of payment. That is one way that people are saying it. And to get over the local area issue, this local zone way is another way to get around that problem in a road pricing model. But, you know, that's for the boffins and the transport economics nerds to kind of deal with. I just sit there and, you know, send flaming arrows at them when they kind of say dumb things. Up the back here.
Oh, good evening. My question's to Michael. I'm not part of a vested interest group other than the fact that I'm sort of peak baby boom. You presented a utopian and a dystopian view of the sort of automated driving future. I'm just curious about timetables and when that would happen. I've also lived through the fact that my good old dad, who has just died, but basically gave up his licence at 90 years of age, and we worried for years about, you know, the fact that he was on the road. I'm just curious, you know, at what stage will we move to something that might assist with that particular problem? Thank you.
Sure. So I think you need to split what governments and companies and startups and corporates in this space say publicly and what they're actually doing behind the scenes. So everyone is trying to create fully autonomous, almost everyone is trying to create fully autonomous cars that a human doesn't interact with. They're not responsible for taking over. If that technology develops fast enough and it works, then that will be fantastic for giving wider mobility access to people as they age, people who are vision impaired, disabled people, and so forth. And that will be a fantastic quality of life enabler for those people. If that fails, well, there's a failure point there, which is the companies doing all of this stuff just cherry pick the C-level executives and upper middle class people who work in the city and go, they're the cash cows for earning money, and they target them for the technology, and no one else has access to the cars because they're not paying enough money. So as long as the government and the public steps in and makes sure that doesn't happen, then we have widespread access to the vehicles. The second problem is the technology. If they do not make the cars fully autonomous, where a human has no interaction with it, their backup option is what they have now, where the human has to supervise the car, they have to be able to intervene. Frankly, it's a bad idea for a number of reasons, but that doesn't help anyone who can't already drive. So that has massive equity issues. Watch this space. We don't know which of those outcomes is going to be.
And timing? The question of how
timing.
long
So
before this comes?
this isn't going to go down well with this audience, but the money and the technical feasibility is in carefully controlled ride-sharing fleets in the centre of Sydney or San Francisco, where revenue is high, where the cars are used 23 hours a day, where the business people already use Ubers, so it's a seamless transition.
And the reason being the expense of the vehicle.
It's a number of things. The vehicles will be expensive. They'll have R&D to recoup, so they need high revenue base. Cars move slowly in the city, so when they hit people, the impact will be. I'm not saying this flippantly. I'm just pointing it out. It's not like a highway where it's more catastrophic. You can cheat. You can put sensors all over the infrastructure and assist your cars to be better. It's a very dense area. There's all sorts of reasons why, if it happens, it will probably happen there first, rather than out in the burbs.
I have a slightly different view. When you look at the technology in cars at the moment is evolving, and the next step will be incremental change to autonomous driving, and it will be on short sections of the road. Now, again, when you look at the laws that ministers or the policy ministers endorsed last year, they recognise that it's evolutionary technology and that humans will need to be what they call fallback ready. So if not to override the car when it's in autonomous mode, but to be ready to take over when the car says you have to be ready to take it back.
We had this discussion with your colleague in Sydney a few hours ago at a panel like this. The whole problem with incremental is all of the hundreds of billions of dollars invested in this field is invested on the predicate that we have fully autonomous systems where they can play ads to you, they're perfect, they save 1 million lives a year. If we go to incremental systems with last mile shuttles and cars taking short legs, 90% of the investment will disappear overnight in activity because that's just not a lucrative return for them. So that's not necessarily a problem, but you'd see a massive transformation in what's happening in the field.
Up the back here.
Hey, my name's Alistair, and my question was basically just to the general panel. You were talking about electric cars earlier. I think my problem with electric cars and most people's problem is just the charging times. Like to charge up the cars, it can take quite a long time unless you use those Tesla superchargers. Why wouldn't we use more like hydrogen power cars where you could just go to a petrol station and you use just hydrogen? Because I think also from an environmental point of view, electric cars, when people throw them away and stuff, all the battery acid just over time corrodes and goes into the river systems and stuff. So basically...
hydrogen cells, why hasn't that appeared? Are you able to speak to that at all? Anyone here?
So Australia is fantastic. Like if things progress at a reasonable rate without any amazing breakthroughs, Australia will have something like 50% of its power supplied by PV photovoltaics in the next, I think, 15 years was one of the projections, or 20 years I saw. So that could power all these electric cars. The recycling issue is an issue, but there are people putting together schemes which mitigate those issues with toxic chemicals and recycling and reusing them to a significant extent. The charging issue is an issue that people are making great progress on. Yes, there are not fast chargers widely available, but companies like Tritium are working very, very hard to make sure you're never very far from a very rapid charger. So charge cycle times will probably be less and less of a problem at quite a quick rate. So these are issues, it's a teething technology. A lot of them look promising for massive improvements over the coming years. So a lot of those problems will mostly go away.
What I can tell you is there are universities in the US where security guards on campus are now basically solving the vandalism and fisticuffs between people who have unplugged the charging car, taken the charger and put it on their car in the campus car park where the facilities are. So look forward to that kind of shenanigans going on near you. Okay, our next question is here.
Hi, Justin Clackety from the Australian Privacy Foundation.
Aha.
For comment to the traffic light dude, he was probably speeding because...
Respect, yes.
Traffic lights are based on average speed, and hydrogen, we need infrastructure to get that around, which we don't have. Question to Matthew, I think it is, the AI...
Michael is AI,
sorry.
Matthew is...
Michael then.
Yep.
Your utopia and dystopia, both, and also to the smart cities stuff, require pretty significant data collection. What's the privacy impacts of that?
There's huge privacy issues to make the technology really effective, to make it seamlessly integrated into the smart cities. You have to collect the data, you have to share it with all the different parts of a smart city. There's really no way around that. There are a lot of challenges to overcome. I would just point out that these are not mostly new challenges. These challenges already exist in our pocket in terms of our phones. And these are challenges where a lot of the problems will be solved in parallel in big fields like health, or finance, or online security. So while these new technologies will introduce new takes and pivots on those problems, a lot of them will be solved because they're universal problems.
Geoff?
Just to follow up, it's looking at privacy of automated vehicle users is something the government has asked us to look at, and we're talking to the Australian Privacy Commissioners. They met last Friday. We will probably have to go out with a privacy impact statement sometime in the next 2 to 3 years that looks at this. So it's certainly something we're aware of, and certainly something that we will be probably, along with privacy commissioners, consulting on in the next couple of years.
Well, the question will be, if one wanted to opt out of these systems, if one wanted to remain unplugged, will that continue to remain a right, or it will become a privilege of some sort at some point, and only for certain people who can afford to pay, for example?
And I would say, I think the privacy issue per se is only a small subset of a much larger set of issues. And I think the philosopher Jacques Deleuze, when he talked about the society of control, was really onto something and was prophetic about the age that we're in and the potential for the smart cities movement and ITS and these other things to gently usher us into an era where we've subjugated ourselves to subtle control. And I say that having spent a fair bit of time in Shanghai, where my own movements were monitored, as all citizens of that city are, in ways that I think would be troubling for some Australians.
The left-o communists riding their bike can probably not be tracked. Just turn tracking off on your phone, you're still good.
Unless you're photographed on certain roads entering...
The self-driving cars will be tracking the locations of all of your bikes.
Yes. All right. We've still got time, so are there other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I've got a few for you.
Well, one, please, if that's okay. I saw other hands.
Well, talking about the toll roads and the Gateway Bridge and that, the Gateway Bridge was built for the people. We paid that bridge off years ago, and now the government sold it out, and we're still paying for the bridge. And we don't want to pay for toll bridges, we don't want to pay for toll roads. I avoid them too. And the M1 is a traffic nightmare. I'm a night nurse, and I can tell you that I've been late for work because of the M1 at night. At 10:30 at night, it's a car park still. It's a car park all day, every day, north and south. When are you going to fix that? You take our money for our petrol. We have the dearest petrol in Australia. You know, you take our car retros, it's now nearly $500 for 6 months for a 6-cylinder car. Most people have at least 2 cars, and I need 2 cars to go to work if one's been fixed. I can't get public transport at night. You're going to put a train station into Logan Hospital. Bob's been in and out of Logan Hospital with a heart condition for the last 2 months. At midnight, I'm not going to catch a train to get off at Kingston to be assaulted by the people that hang around the stations at Logan Lee, Woodridge, Kingston, all those suburbs. I can tell you, any night, anyone will tell you get assaulted. So a woman is not safe, a man's not safe. He's being chased from the station at night. So there's no security at these stations. You want us to take public transport? There isn't any public transport.
Yeah.
I've written 4 submissions to Draki Chad when she was in, which I'm happy to send to you. I recommend that you put a train station from Cleveland going across to the Hyperdome, because you've got Canibia and all those suburbs in there, taking it across the Beenleigh and taking it across the Browns Plains, because you've got to either go up to Park Road to go to the suburbs.
Yeah. So we're getting into detail there about very localised
You're not
issues.
providing the infrastructure for the people, and you're charging the people more.
Yeah. So first thing to say is I don't think anyone here is a senior policy maker or politician. So that's just the first thing to say. I'm actually doing some research in the Logan area at the moment with one of my colleagues is here, Abraham Logan. Is Ben in the audience? We're looking at that exact landscape. And it's pretty grim out there. I have to tell you, it is pretty grim. Suburbs like Eagleby, where the bus stops at 5:30 at night. So it is pretty grim. Is there anything anyone on the panel would like to say? No?
It's a tough one, but I'll just comment on some facts that were raised here. Talking about bridges in particular, it is quite hard to say that a bridge was paid off and that's it. There you go. In real life, there is a cost to build a bridge, and there is also a massive cost to maintain the bridge at the level of service that is expected for its safe use. And I'm sure you also in the news, just 2 weeks ago, what happened in Italy, in Genoa, and that was a classic case of budget cuts and poor maintenance on a strategic piece of infrastructure. So just to say that it's not just a once-off cost. Our roads also have a cost to be maintained.
Yeah. Can I just say on that issue though, the political message is never that. So there is a rail line that goes to an airport here that would be in state hands now because its concession would have ended, but is not in state hands now and has not seen the prices come down for that facility as promised to the people at the time that project was pitched. Similarly, the Gateway, and we can go back to how it was pitched in the Parliament of this state, it was pitched to the people that it would return to state hands, that the fees could therefore be removed at that time. Clem 7, the same promise has been made. Airport Link, the same promise has been made. I will be amazed if in they're the longest concessions in history almost. Anyway, we've got another 43 years to go or something for Airport Link. But I'll be amazed if that promise is ever met to the electorate. And what I'm getting at is it's weasel words by politicians. I think people know that this is not how it's going to happen, but the pitch is made knowing that I'm out of office and I'm out at 40 years from here now. Who cares? And so there is not that political accountability for those decisions at that time. And that's why we get anger like that. Next question. Sorry.
It'll be good. Okay. Anthony Bishop. I've had the privilege of living in Singapore for 10 years and they use road pricing relentlessly. Which side of politics do you think would use it as relentlessly here? And would it gain public acceptance?
Good luck. So Singapore doesn't just use road pricing, they use a quota system that says this is how much road space we have, we'll only let out this many licence plates, and then they do a cap and trade scheme. So then they cap the number of registrations and they trade them, they auction them, and you have to pay like 100,000 Australian dollars to put, a Hyundai on the road,
But they also have superb public transport.
I don't think that's politically feasible in a car-owning democracy like Australia. Forget the road price, the marginal road pricing they then include on top. So I don't think we're moving to the Singapore model tomorrow. The other fact being that 96% or something of Singapore residents live in a box in the sky, owned effectively by the government. They're not, but provided by government. The delivery mechanism is through government. So again, I don't think that's coming in the Australian settlement. Any other comments?
Look, I'm happy to throw a comment in that. Just looking back at the country where I was born, France, as you can guess, back in 2000 and I think it was 11 or 12, the government decided to implement road pricing. So just doing what I was mentioning before, your tracking, and they were using some gantries on highways, trying to make people pay as they go. They spent billions of dollars to install the gantries and all the tech. And at the end, let me tell you, that was so unpopular that there was trucks on the road. The truckies were wearing some hats, to rally together. And end of the story was that the government was voted out, and they kissed goodbye to billions of dollars of gantries and tech that is just unused. So there is obviously a political risk for anyone that is going to try that in any country.
Yep. So this is mainly to Matthew Burke. What impact has transport politics had and will have on public transport services? Particularly, what impact do you think it will have on Brisbane's bus network?
Brisbane's bus network, okay. Look, some really pleasing things have come out of the Lord Mayor's transport strategy, where they're actually talking the language of bus rail integration for the first time in a very, very, very long time. Brisbane operates its buses on an I shall not go near a railway station operating model. It creates one of the greatest inefficiencies in a public transport system anywhere in the world, and is one of the reasons for the hideously low passenger numbers on our city rail network and the incredibly high subsidy rates that we are paying. So a very significant share of the subsidies that we all pay for public transport are going to rail, and that's got to change. And every attempt to fix that in the past has just led to debacle. And so we're finally seeing at least some good language and a commitment at strategy level to fix that. How fast we move towards fixing that, I really don't know. There are so many other things that need to be done with the bus networks. Where do I begin? But we actually, the busways have been an international success. When people come around the world, they come to Brisbane. What do they really want to see? They want to see our CityCat system, which has been a world leader, and they want to see the ferries. They don't want to see our rail system. So if I can actually suggest you, the real sick man of the story here is City Rail, and Cross River Rail is an important part of fixing that, but so is integrating the buses in. I'll shut up at that point.
Okay. Can I ask a question to the other panelists who know far more about this topic? So there are two sort of immutable truths. So it's very hard to quickly change the geographical layout of a city and its infrastructure overnight, and it's very hard to change culture. So you've talked a little bit about what happens overseas. What is the most positive example from an overseas city of all the changes that you want done in a culturally similar, geographically laid out similar city?
Well, there are a couple of good examples in North America to learn from. I mean, cities like Portland and Vancouver are certainly success stories we could look at.
What did they do?
Okay, so they've implemented some really good policies on cycling, which includes increasing the level of infrastructure by a lot. Portland has implemented these city growth limits, which we don't seem to have in Brisbane. We seem to be willing to sprawl all over. In fact, we're creating this megalopolis. The Gold Coast is pretty much joining the Sunshine Coast at this point, going through Brisbane. So do we want that, or do we want some containment of these cities? So in Portland, they've done that. Vancouver is an example of the policy I just mentioned before, just saying that we're not going to deal with car congestion, you deal with it. It's your choice to sit in traffic, so just handle it.
We'll give you alternatives.
We'll give you alternatives. So the money we have, we've chosen to invest it in alternative. We have provided those, so now it's your choice to sit in traffic. And those are contexts that are geographically and culturally very similar to ourselves.
No, I think that's an excellent answer. So next question is up the back.
Thank you. So I just got back from Shanghai, and first I quite enjoyed your comment about the integration of the buses and the trains. That's not something I thought of. That makes sense. So you would have seen the underground metro system in Shanghai.
Yes.
That's amazing. It's probably really overkill for something like Brisbane, but do you think we'll ever see that in the future?
Okay, yes. All right. So does anyone want to speak about the gradual change to the city train network and what we're currently doing? Anyone? No? Me again? Okay. Okay. So you'll have noticed that the inner city network of Brisbane on City Train now runs at a 15-minute frequency. They're trying to turn a 19th century alignment rail system into a sort of metro-like system in the inner city, and then complement that with a less frequent sort of, express past that inner city network and then stop at all stations, but less frequent outer suburban commuter rail service. We're trying to bifurcate our existing city rail as we speak. But you're right, the system's brilliant in Shanghai, but can I tell you, it's a giant planning disaster on another level. They've built these metros way out into the outer suburbs. One of the line goes 77 kilometres. It's the equivalent of building it to the Gold Coast. And it stops every single station, 2 and something hours to get to the centre of Shanghai. It's maniacally mad, crazy stuff. The biggest system in the world, great, but really suboptimal. And they're wasting quite a bit of their investment. So yes, parts of it are awesome, parts of it are really just giant wastes of money. But hey, yeah. Sorry, yes, I get animated, yeah.
I mean, generally, if we want to think about cities that have subways, we also want to think about the kind of densities they have. Like Matt talked about before, in Singapore, people are willing to live in a box up in the sky. Are we willing to do that as a society? So that's what we need to ask ourselves. We can't have it both ways, both really fast, state-of-the-art subway and very low densities, large backyards on quarter-acre lots.
No.
That's the choice we have to make.
Yep. So where was our next? Sorry, I can barely see at the back there. So our next, I see a hand over here, but where is our next question? Sorry? I see a hand here. If you've got other questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm happy to call time early tonight and we'll all hit the bar.
Yes, good evening. Look, in relation to comments there just a moment ago about the box in the sky concept of living, we see in Jacob's Well a large sugarcane plantation for quite some time has just been bought out by the Chinese, and that whole area is going to be turned into a massive super city, high-rise high density. And what we're seeing already between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, and had been foreshadowed for years, is increased population. And like Pimpama, for instance, the fastest growing area in Queensland, soon to be overtaken by Jacob's Well, with the Chinese approved a super city by the Gold Coast City Council. So we currently have on foot the M1 improvements that are in place, which are causing a lot of congestion. Is there any way you think the governments could be advised to look at more strategic planning to build more future certainty into the transport system?
You want to tackle that as a planner, Dorina?
I'm not sure. Maybe you deal with that as a local.
Anyone? Oh, goodness me. I think we're a long way from that development happening at Jacob's Well. That's the first thing I'd say. But, development pressures do build over time. And I was amazed that Yarrabilba was permitted when it was permitted. These are out-of-sequence developments. By that meaning they're well away from the contiguous urban footprint, although Jacob's Well's, as Dorina said, getting closer and closer to that. Greenfields is not dead in Australian society. There is still great demand for that product. It has served us well in some respects. The cheap house and land package was for many decades an essential way of delivering affordable housing for Australians, for working and middle class families for a very long time, and it served us well until the contradictions of that model started to become more and more apparent. And as cities grow in size, and this is this issue, like in Hobart you can continue with that model because they've got peak minute. Let's face it, they've got peak minute. They still whinge down there, about traffic congestion. It's the worst thing. There was someone in front of me at the traffic lights yesterday. We need to build a freeway. But we are just going, the more and more we do this, and the more and more we continue to grow our trip distances from that middle and outer suburban belt, particularly the distance to a workplace, the more and more we find ourselves in trouble. And I go back to what I said before, the solution to the car is not always more car. And there are investments we could be making now to help link up some of that outer suburban infrastructure so that there are alternatives in the middle and outer suburbs for people.
So Matt, is this whole issue one about the total mindset of our country anyway? And so, we look at European examples, and the European cities are all built on the basis of defending something. As we got here to Australia and we decided to spread out because we're frontier people and we needed to get out there, and we've got boundless plains to share. It's in the national anthem. And so, we don't want to share them, but we've got boundless plains. And so we've got this idea that we couldn't spread out because there's room in Australia. But what it leads to is the sort of things we're talking about. It leads to a poorly planned city. It leads to the lack of density to be able to build public transport systems.
Let me give you one really good example in the Australian settlement of a setting I would change pretty much overnight. And we do it in different ways in the different states, and Queensland started to get savvier about this. So kudos to the last couple of, across party lines, last couple of governments. And that is that one of the easiest ways to make a buck is to sit on some land on the outskirts of the city. Like, I don't know, a family who may have made their money out of a murder not very far from here, and then own cattle yards and a butchery in the centre of the city. Eventually paid for University of Queensland site, the main inheritance, but made a lot of their money out of land that was on the outskirts of the city that got permitted to be zoned urban and built for urban, and and where the landholder claims an infinite sum. So someone who owns a property at Jacobs Well, shall we say, I shouldn't pick on that, but some mythical suburb on the outskirts of the suburbs gets permission from the state to suddenly allow housing to be built there, and they take a windfall sum in their pocket. And I think we need to dial that back. I think we need to take some of that cash and actually use it to spend on the transport infrastructure and other things. And we need to create settings as we do that encourage contiguous development so that suburbs are linked up. People actually don't have to burn 3 litres of fuel to buy 1 litre of milk. That would be a good metric we should kind of put into planning to actually change that. Because if you get out to that landscape, out past Logan Village and the like, there are gated community retirement villages and little crappy subdivisions in the middle of bloody nowhere where no one can get to anything by any means of transport. And it just shouldn't be happening.
Well, Matt, I think this is a little bit an issue of identity. I think even though Australia now is by all definitions and measures an urban nation, almost 90% of people live in cities, we still see this country as a country of farmers and miners, the country of kangaroos, the country of boundless land. And maybe that served the population well back in the day when people, were just taking land and building a farm, and they did live life mostly locally. But now we're an urban nation and cities don't work that way. I mean, in cities, if your commute gets longer than 1 hour, that's extremely detrimental to health. And we're getting to a point in our cities where commutes are getting longer than an hour each way. And we just cannot continue that way, in that kind of mentality. Maybe it's just that our whole identity as a nation needs to change. We need to start thinking of ourselves as city people that live in higher concentrations.
Yeah. But I think there is still a role for the suburbs, and I still think that we can... I'm with Peter Newman and other theorists who say if we just converted 10% of the land of the existing city to higher density development, and another 10%, say, of the existing suburbs to medium, that missing middle, not the really scary high stuff, but the kind of 3-4 story stuff.
That would be enough.
And do that around the key transport nodes and the like, we can house pretty much as many people as we have in Brisbane. Again, retain these suburban lifestyles, retain this kind of suburban amenity, and have pretty good cities. And I think there are ways forward we could start to look at that kind of model. All right. Are there any last questions? And I think we'll call it after these two. That's okay? Or is that another hand over here? No? Okay, these two.
All right, wonderful. My name's Adam Gibson. I've got to dig at the tension between Michael and Geoff, between the advocate for level 5 autonomy.
I'm not an advocate, I'm just trying to inform.
Mm-hmm. And level 2 autonomy. For the audience, that's truly driverless, steering wheel-less cars versus what they call hands-off vehicles. My question is to Geoff. Given that most vehicle safety technology for the last 20 years has been around taking the human out of the equation in emergencies, how can the same organisation that supported the business cases for ABS, EBS, stability control and autonomous emergency braking advocate for level 2 autonomy?
And who's advocating for level 2 autonomy?
You were essentially, or supporting the development of level 2 autonomy, NTC.
I didn't interpret it that way, but...
I think what is happening, I don't want to be an advocate for any type of technology, and we're certainly trying to craft laws and, again, on the instructions of ministers that are technology neutral. But level 2 technology is out there. So I'll give you an example of how it can be misused. So on I think it was the 23rd of May 2016, in Florida, there was a guy called Joshua Brown. Now, this guy was coming back from Disneyland, he left his family in Disney World on a holiday. He was a former mine detonation technician in Iraq, and he worked in computers. And he was driving his Tesla. So he understood risk and he understood computers. But he was, from what the reports say, watching a Harry Potter film in his level 2 Tesla while a truck turned in front of him. He was the first casualty of autonomous driving at level 2. So not because of that, but ministers have made it very clear that there should be an entity that is in charge of a vehicle at the right time when it is appropriate to do so. So in those circumstances, it was appropriate for the human to always be in control of the vehicle because the technology wasn't fit for that purpose. But when it is fit, it should be appropriate that technology can be in control. And realising that, and I think Michael pointed this out, and this is where we're in furious agreement, it is easier for the technology to be in control when the situation is relatively simple. So Volvo at the moment in Gothenburg in Sweden is trialling autonomous vehicles on effectively limited access roads, a freeway, the Gothenburg Ring Road, because there are no crossroads, there are no pedestrians, there are none of the normal congestion things you get in a city. So I think the technology will be evolutionary. I think, as I say, I'm not an advocate, and certainly the National Transport Commission is not an advocate for every type of technology, but realising that people will buy this technology, they will want to use it, and we're trying to make sure that the laws are in place so that people, not just the people in the vehicle, but everyone on the road around that vehicle is safe.
Okay, and there was a final question here, I think.
Well, we've got one here.
Ah, sorry, apologies. Dr. Abraham Long, my postdoc. Hello, Abraham.
Hello, it's Dorothy Dixon, sorry. My question to the general panel today is, I think something's missing today is, why don't we share in M1? At the morning, most people are single occupant drivers at the morning. You're lucky to see if there's 3 persons in the car, so why don't we share our cars in commuting? Thank you.
The question of sharing. Anyone?
I'll speak very honestly, right? Because it's a pain in the ass to have an extra bit of logistics in terms of timing, in terms of the uncertainty of sometimes having unfavourable interactions, all those it's just an extra concern. So I think putting some carrot and stick measures in place are the ways to sort of get that to actually happen.
So unless there was a compelling reason to do it, this is not part of our culture. If there was a compelling reason financially, or in terms of there was a lane, a T3 lane all the way to the city, then people will do it. But unless there's a good reason to want to do it, we're very self-interested, and I'm sure that's the case in all over the world, but it seems to certainly be the case here.
My brother has a Tesla S, and every time we go over to California, we take it out because I'm a technology geek. So he gets the Plum Park in front of the store. He gets to buy Tesla batteries for like a tiny fraction of the cost because of subsidies. He gets to use the no traffic lane on the road. He gets other subsidies. Even if he didn't care about the environment whatsoever, he's beaten into using it. And that's one way to get these sort of things to happen.
And I'd just say, technical definition, over 50% of the people arriving in the CBD for work in Brisbane are sharing, but true sharing is something called public transport. It's not Uber, that's not sharing. Public transport is sharing, friends. So when you hear about this sharing economy bullcrap, let's think about trains and buses and ferries. That's actually sharing. But anyway, sorry, calm down. Okay. There was one more, sorry, so yes.
Oh, thank you.
And then we can...
I just would draw to people's attention, I don't know if anybody remembers the city shape thing that took place a number of years ago, where the people of Brisbane were asked about the way that they wanted their city to go, and what they actually wanted was hubs around the place. And I think we've done that to a certain extent, but not really. I say the problem with Brisbane is half the time we get these ideas from overseas and we half implement them. And it's the half that makes the money, and we don't do the half that makes it actually livable for the city. But anyway, that's that one. The other thing is that when you think about transport in Brisbane, there are lovely ideas from overseas, and most of them are from temperate climates. We are in a subtropical climate, whether we like it or not, and we need transport options that work for a subtropical climate. And we also need when we are doing that sort of thing, if you want people to ride bikes, make pleasant places for people to ride bikes. Have street trees. I know this is turning into a statement that you didn't want, but
yes, I was about to call that.
yeah, but what I'm saying, I would like a comment on that, because I think a lot of the solutions I see do not address A, our climate, and B, the fact that a lot of the planning issues are to do with we really need to start thinking about it and making changes in that direction.
Dorina, Andrew, do you have things to say?
Look, a friend of mine who's a town planner says it doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is always street trees. And I think I totally agree with that. I think in terms of Brisbane being a subtropical place, I think that is a big factor in all of our decision making and the things that we find convenient. I do think that e-bikes are a technological solution that a lot of people are going to find to be convenient and useful, and therefore will put more pressure on our city and our state governments to provide for bikes, because there'll be people buying e-bikes because they're a great way to get around. And you don't have to sweat in January if you're riding your e-bike sort of 5, 6, 8, 10 kilometres. So I think that there is positives about our climate. I think Brisbane, 9 months of the year, is a brilliant place to live, and I'd like to move to Hobart for summers.
Anything?
Well, and I agree about with the comment about the hubs. In fact, very recently we did some research with a student looking at urban design qualities of high streets or main streets, neighborhood centers outside the inner city, and we found that the urban design quality is indeed very, very poor, and it does correlate very highly to the number of pedestrians on those streets. So yes, that's definitely a big problem, and that's part of what I talked about when I spoke about a monocentric city earlier, is the jobs that are all concentrated in the inner city, but then also all our culture and all our interesting places to go are all in the inner city, so we need to distribute a bit more.
So I hang out with these crazy Danish transport planner types sometimes, and I'll just say one thing I would love to have that they have. Because of the snow, they have to replace the entire road every 30 years. The ice breaks everything up, and they basically come in every 30 years and redo the street. But they've decided in most Dutch and Danish cities now, pretty much, that they'll do this with the community and they'll redesign the street at that time. And they actually work with local communities on what local streets will look like. And guess what they tend to ask for, those communities? Bike lanes, street trees. And our built environment is really rigid. It does not change, and there are no ways for communities to really have agency about changing their street. I, as a homeowner in Salisbury, have absolutely no real agency to be able to change how my street looks. It's got these, I'm within 2 blocks of 3 primary schools. There's not a footpath on either side of my street. There are curved radiature to allow cars to go around a street at 50 kilometres per hour. You know, it's crazy stuff. But there is no way for me to change that. And so there is an issue with our politics at that micro-granular level about changing how transport works for us as humans. Anyway, sorry. So thank you, everybody. Sorry for talking too much. I hope you've had an enjoyable evening. I do have some things I need to say. First of all, can I say thank you to our speakers? If you'll give me a round of applause. Can I also thank our questioners? Very enlightened audience, thank you very much. A reminder that there is a merch table that direction. As you're headed for the exit, don't go rushing out. Delay your travel time, add an extra destination. The merch table is over there. The next Politics in the Pub is happening on the 30th of October. If you wish to vote for your preferred topic, you can do so by heading to the merch table. The merch table, all right. Extra reason to make a stop on your travel home. Reminder about that Transport and Public Works submission. And can I just say thank you very much to the organisers for this event. I think I speak for the panel when I say it is a delight to work with community organisations who actually know what they're doing and are very, very, very professional in how they do it. Well ahead of many of your comparators in private industry and in some levels of government. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Can I just say, safe travels home. If you're here, drink responsibly. If you're driving, drive safely. Thank you very much, everyone.